For a lot of people, those early years are a grind, least sexy years of your career. And oftentimes you have tough jobs, tough bosses. My advice would be not to run from those tough challenges as long as you're learning and there's a good culture. In my personal experience, I had some very tough bosses, but I don't view those as bad experiences because I was learning a lot. They were competent bosses. It was a beta test for the future, basically. Even if the job is tough or the boss is tough, if it's a good culture, that'll take you pretty far. In our business, there's lots of companies out there that are capable of doing the job. My line of work has been to build something. We're not designing it or putting things together. In my experience with a lot of clients are selecting people on who they like. Whether it be a small or big company, I think that culture plays a large role in business development, creating and then maintaining that momentum. Boston's a unique market. There's no shortage of talent. Most clients and owners have a half dozen good people to select, good firms. Aligning yourself with a good culture is almost as important, if not, than the talent, in my opinion.
Hi everyone, welcome to Design Development, brought to you by H&O Structural Engineering. This is your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Renz Hayes, co-founder of H&O, lifelong learner, and I'm obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, I can't thank you enough. Let's go. Hey everyone, we have an exciting guest for today's episode. Allow me to introduce Steve Laverty. He is a partner at Jumbo Capital and a co-founder and partner at Surus Development Construction. Steve's career path is an exciting one. It's one that is packed with takeaways, both for people in construction and development. He actually went to school for liberal arts. He had a liberal arts major and found himself in the construction industry. I'll wait for the episode for you to find out more about that. And then as he navigated the construction industry, he was always driven to become an organizational leader, to own his own business. And he went on to get an MBA and ultimately became a part of Jumbo Capital and launched Surus Development and Construction. If you know someone that's interested in building a business, navigating their career, overcoming the pain points and the challenges the construction industry presents, this is a great conversation. Please share the episode with them. It's the only way we can help more people. And without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Steve Laverty. Please join me in welcoming Steve Laverty. Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Steve, you got a really interesting career journey. You're involved in development, you're involved in construction, you worked in construction, you got an MBA. So there's a lot to learn from your journey, and I'm excited to dive in. For those that don't know you, could you talk a little bit about yourself and share what businesses you're involved in today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a partner at Jumbo Capital, and I'm a co-founder and principal at Surus Development and Construction, which is an affiliate of Jumbo Capital. Yeah, so Jumbo Capital is the traditional investment asset management firm. It primarily or solely right now operates in Eastern Massachusetts. No asset class is out of reach, although historically we haven't done a lot of hospitality and retail. It started as essentially an office portfolio. Back in, I think it was 2009, Jay Hirsch founded the company. Jumbo Capital stems from Tufts University, so those local may recognize that. Surus is actually an elephant as well. There's a family of companies. They all have elephant-themed names.
Very interesting. So a history tying back to Tufts University. What's the significance of the elephant?
It's the mascot at Tufts, so I don't know that there's any more story to it.
It's as simple as that. All right.
As simple as that. I mean, Surus is a kind of a, maybe not the easiest name for introducing to people, but that's
unique. It's memorable. I like the name. For a sense of scale, so you've been in business, Jumbo's been around for about 15 years. What about square foot, assets under management?
So it fluctuates, of course, but it's roughly a little over 4 million square feet. In the portfolio, roughly 800 million assets under management. The company is rather full service, so it acquires, it performs asset management, handles the leasing, it does property management in-house, of course, dispositions, and then originally it had construction and development services. And then the story obviously changes a few years ago when Surus was formed and took a more active role in managing the construction projects.
Very exciting. And just to close out on Jumbo, so property management, you guys obviously have a lot of property to manage just for yourselves. Does that property management company serve third party as well?
It has not, no.
So it's really, it's an entity owning and operating. So you're largely developing to own and maintain.
Yeah, and that's, of course, subject to change. And I can't speak for the future of Jumbo,
Sure.
but that was a value proposition early on. So as they grew and were trying to tap into institutional capital, that was a selling point. We do everything in-house. So some people like that. Some investors would choose to have it outsourced. We thought it was a value and we ran with it. And I don't see that changing, but it's always possible.
Yeah. You keep mentioning like the plan to date, right? The intent isn't to sell. And I think of business through that same lens. Is I like to make business decisions with the expectations that I'm going to own this forever, right? So I'm always making the future value add. And God forbid anything changes, you're still in a good position to move that asset. So like, some things change over time, but making this development decisions with the intent to own, I think, is a really good place to start. So I appreciate that with Jumbo Capital. Little into your history as we come, because you've clearly launched your own construction company in Surus. What led you into construction in the first place? Because you have an interesting college story, not your typical path.
Yeah, I mean, to be candid, I wasn't really supposed to be in construction. I went to a liberal
Love
arts
that
school.
Statement. Was never supposed to be in construction.
It absolutely wasn't a planned thing. I went to a small liberal arts school as a business major. At the time, I was focused on, oddly enough, trying to work in hospitals, healthcare administration. Came out of college, took a little detour out west to pursue some skiing dreams. And
what were your big mountains?
I started in Colorado, came back, and then got into some competitive skiing and landed in Jackson Hole for a season and traveled around the country, North America.
Cool.
And, came back and maybe got some discounted ski goggles, but it was far from a career. So ended up back in Boston at, a pretty entry-level job for about 11 months. And then through a family friend, got introduced to William A. Berry & Son. It was a construction management firm that no longer exists, but it was a pretty prominent firm that was focused on healthcare. So both academic and healthcare. I personally only worked on lab and hospital projects. That was up in the North Shore. And they essentially took me on at project coordinator level, which back then, you couldn't get any more entry level. And so that company had a variety of titles that all more or less amounted to an APM role. So they had project coordinator, project engineer, senior project engineer. I think other big GCs just have APM and PM. So I worked my way through that a little bit, and they quite literally told me, like, it's fine. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, no loss. You couldn't be less experienced and cheaper. So that's really truthfully.
We can pay you nothing and give you a shot. So let's see where you end up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so you were able to take that opportunity and create a really great career out of it. Like, what were some of those first early wins? Like, you were in procurement. Is that where you started off?
I started off at that project coordinator role. I had the fortune of, being with some good people on some good projects, or clients rather. But I don't know that there were great wins in those early years because it was pretty routine. So for those listening that have been in the business long enough, you'll remember submittals were manually stamped, filled in. And so a lot of the grind wasn't necessarily intellectually stimulating or educational. It was just, like a baptism by fire test. So
call that busy work.
I would say
right?
those first couple of years were, you're just trying to advance. The way they had that company set up was, you're supposed to move every couple of years up to a new position. You're really doing the same job for quite a lot of years, just slightly more advanced levels of responsibility and accountability there. But it was a lot of, RFIs, submittals, documentation control, which still exists just the same in the business. Although back then it was much more manual, lots of physical mailing, processing.
Thank God for technology. Like, if I had to print out a shop drawing to review it and mark it up with a pen, that would be a tough day.
I used to like my fingers would almost fall off. I'd be spending Saturdays in there just stamping shop drawings. And, so I don't know that there were a lot of wins, but it was nonetheless a pretty good experience. It challenged me to try and figure out how I was going to navigate the career because I really, admittedly, got pretty down on it at that point. It seemed like that there wasn't much of a future there. When I was looking ahead to future roles, I just figured there was a chance of climbing that ladder, gaining better titles, hopefully better money and better exposure to clients. But it seemed like a long road. So I actually left about 2.5 years into that, went to a small developer, and then ended up back there.
Takeaway for people entering their career there is you had your head up looking out years ahead. So you were taking the opportunity in an industry you weren't really experienced in, doing the busy, tedious work, but you also had your head up and looking for what skills do I need to develop to advance my career and where can I expect to go, right? So you're trying to find a destination and work towards it. I think that's a really important takeaway for young people. Do you have any other advice for young professionals trying to climb that career ladder?
Yeah, I mean, it's my subjective opinions. I wouldn't take it too seriously, but I would say that for a lot of people, those early years are a grind. They're probably the least sexy years of your career. And oftentimes you have tough jobs, tough bosses. And I guess my advice would be not to run from those tough challenges as long as you're learning and there's a good culture. So in my personal experience, I had some very tough bosses, but I don't view those as bad experiences because I was learning a lot. They were competent bosses and developed a thick skin. And it was a beta test for the future, basically.
Love that perspective.
I think a proxy for some future success. The caveat, though, is that company, it was a fantastic culture. So even if the job is tough or the boss is tough, if it's a good culture, that'll take you pretty far. And I, to this day, still find piece of that culture, and I still I'm trying to intertwine with my current business, and I'm still actively working with people from that experience, nearly 20 years ago.
What part of the culture stuck out to you from back then? Like, what it obviously had a lasting impact.
Yeah, it oddly seemed like it was probably a $500 or $600 million business, and it felt like a small family company. So I'm not going to be able to do it justice as to how they accomplished that, and that's still something I'm chasing. But the people seem to sincerely like each other. So I think the market was not short of talent. They found a way to harness and collect people that just genuinely liked working together, and that's probably a pretty big thing in our industry because you're constantly met with challenges and obstacles to overcome. So who better to do that with people you enjoy? It's also at times, and I think anyone in construction will appreciate this, it's fairly soul-sucking. And I keep using the word grind, but it is. So to be able to do that with people you enjoy will soften the blow a little bit.
Yep. It makes the grind a little less palatable.
Yeah, a little less of a grind.
And that lesson from Barry right there with culture creates momentum, right? So you referenced, I think you said $600 million in annual revenue. That's a big entity. And let's say in a profession, today's world, construction, design industry too, and a lot of industries, you're facing like a labor challenge. There's a labor shortage.
Yes.
And culture can be that momentum wheel to make sure you're driving attention to your business to attract quality people, because that culture is exactly what people are searching for in their career.
I think it's fairly safe to say that in our business, there's lots of companies out there that are capable of doing the job. So predominantly, my line of work is been to build something. We're not designing it, we're putting things together. My experience with a lot of clients are selecting people on who they like, who they're going to experience that project with. So whether it be a small or big company, I think that culture plays a large role in business development and creating and then maintaining that momentum. Because Boston's a unique market. I mean, there's no shortage of talent. So I think most clients and owners have a half dozen good people to select, good firms, and aligning yourself with a good culture is almost as important, if not, than the talent, in my opinion.
Nailed that, Steve. You're absolutely right. Like culture, trying to attract talent to work for your company, it's also going to attract like-minded clients. And when you have alignment with your clients, you enjoy working together no matter how challenging the job is.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. You mentioned challenges working for difficult bosses, even in a great company with a great culture. And what can happen in any industry, there's the Peter principle, and you see it a lot in the construction world and design world too, is people get really good at coordinating construction or doing their job or designing buildings, and then all of a sudden they're managing other people. And they weren't necessarily trained in that way. They haven't learned how to be an effective manager, and they try to do it the best way they know how. But it's also a highly stressful position that can make working for someone like that very challenging.
Yeah.
Right. And so as you became a project manager, you grew your career at Berry. What were some of your responsibilities, and how did you manage transitioning from that new person to the industry as a whole, and in a few short years becoming project manager and overcoming a team?
Well, I think at Berry it was so I'll try and do this somewhat concisely. My first stint at Berry was very much entry level, despite the titles. I had a few different titles. I left to go to a real estate developer, a very small one, and I came back to Berry as a pre-construction engineer. So that role actually never quite evolved, because when I came back to Berry, I got absorbed by some of the hospitals, in particular Beth Israel's, as somewhat of an owner's rep. So I guess my path was not so standard or traditional, but somewhere along that line, the roles and responsibilities shifted from the documentation control to client facing and client expectation and experience management. So that was somewhat of a notable milestone, where you became a little bit of the face of the project of the company. You were the one interacting with the client. You were the one leading the meetings. You may not have been doing all the work behind the scenes, but you were now the face of it and had the responsibility to.
Communication became a core skill that drove value, right?
Yep. Yeah, and a little bit of delegation, but generally I would say communication was probably the most noteworthy skill set we had to hone in on.
Definitely. Yeah, delegating is an important piece as a manager, and it's hard to do when you're really good at your job as a technician in, say, construction or engineering or architecture. You want things to be done the way you could do them and as fast as you can do them, and delegating to people that might not be able to do it as well as you is a really hard hurdle to come over.
I think so. And I think, and personally, in my experience, when I've been in those positions, it's not ever aligned to and I've had tons of resources. So my very first entry into that was right around that recession, so 2009. So I was acting as a PM during the day and a super at night. It's like we didn't have a big team. And even currently in the companies I operate in, we're intentionally lean and almost boutique-like. So I personally haven't had that experience like a very large company where it's very matrixed and there's lots of delegation. So it's a little bit of drinking from the fire hose even at this age.
Yeah, for sure. Could you share a project from your time at Berry, like the sense of scale, a healthcare project that you were working on as, say, a project manager?
Well, in that capacity or that type of role, it generally was a smaller interior, like lobby renovation. So the last one I recall was Newton Wellesley Hospital. And that was, a tight schedule working in occupied conditions, but generally it was a lobby renovation. On the other end of the spectrum, which I was not solely responsible for, we were doing some very large scale core and shell lab buildings down in Longwood. So the takeaway for me was those smaller jobs definitely afforded more learning, frankly. So the larger the job for me, the less responsibility I had. We ended up getting somewhat pigeonholed into certain trades to manage or very certain activities. So you had the value of the scale, which is we can touch on later, but that's certainly important for anyone young, in my opinion, is to have some scale and some brand on your resume. But in my experience, the smaller jobs is where much more learning came from.
It's a great piece of advice. Smaller projects are going to have a shorter life cycle, which means you get to see something from start to finish. You're going to wear more hats because there's going to be less resources allocated to the project. And when you're in that growth stage or in those learning years, that's something you don't want to overlook. Like the big projects, they look great on the resume, but you can get siloed into what your actual responsibility is on the job.
Yeah, and I can touch on this real quick because it's not I never forget it. But the Barry became Suffolk Construction at some point. So my second tour, Suffolk Construction bought us. Some of my smallest jobs is where I learned the most. But at some point, I was out there in the market interviewing. And absolutely, the reason I was getting those interviews was because I had Suffolk Construction and Barry on my resume. So if I were in the position of advising anyone younger, let's say for some parameters in their 20s, when you potentially have less responsibilities at home, I would start big. I would go to these large companies that have some of the best processes, whether it's documentation control, safety, they have the best brand awareness. You're going to work with presumably lots of other peers that you're going to share the experience with. People are going to spin out of there. You're going to have a wider network when you come out of it all. But at some point, unless you're in it for the life, I would peel off and then go small. So I would start big, go small, and then you'll theoretically be in a position with a really excellent resume on paper with some real tangible skill sets to make your move, whatever that may be.
Amazing piece of advice, Steve. And I would reiterate that I have a similar experience where I coming out of college, I was really focused on getting into the biggest types of projects I could work on because I wanted to see how things operated, were executed at the highest level. And then fast forward a number of years, I go back to run the small to mid-sized steel fabricating company and launch an engineering business. I already saw how all the companies were operating at the top. Yeah. Like it gave me that visibility, so I knew where we were trying to go versus starting small and not having an understanding how a bigger corporation operates and then trying to figure every lesson out as you go. It's a tough,
like you're peeking under the hood of like what your future is, you hope, or what you're trying to
it gives you, and you learn from both the benefits, the pros from that, and still what are the things that they solve for, right? And almost when you're in those organizations, you get to learn pain points too.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Hands down.
How do people respond to the culture, to the pressure, all of those things? You get really good insights from working at that level.
Yeah, I would concur.
Big companies, big projects. You worked on small projects, got a ton of experience, built this confidence that you knew what you were doing. There was still something missing with the project management because you shortly thereafter left to go to grad school and move on to run a business. So could you share, like, what were some of the challenges, the biggest challenges in project management that made it so difficult?
Well, to put it in some context, that time in my life was we're in that recession. So there quite literally were staffing meetings every week or two where there were layoffs. And for anyone who hasn't experienced it, that's
tough.
Grad school, it was always on my horizon. I always had planned to go there. And, they say people go to grad school for different reasons. They're either trying to advance their current career or pivot. I was in the camp of, frankly, not knowing. So I wasn't sure if I was going to come out the tail end of that, trying to be somewhat associated with the commercial real estate industry or pivot to another industry altogether. I know at that point in my life, I didn't see project management as a long-term future. And that was for a whole handful of reasons. But I really wanted to build a company. So I did this in undergrad. We did, it was a kind of an entrepreneurial-based program, capstones. I went to grad school I went to Babson in particular because that seemed to be the mecca of entrepreneurialism around here. And I didn't know what I was going to come out with. I thought I was going to maybe go to a whole different industry. And as a little cheesy as it sounds, I had this epiphany where I sat down and I tried to make a list of the things that I thought I was good at, things I enjoyed, and tried to refine what type of industry. I had a folder of 45 different companies and industries I was applying to. It was getting ridiculous. So I needed a little bit more focus. And I came back to the conclusion that it was my success was going to be based on an alignment. So my natural skill sets seemed to be project management, communication, being external, extroverted. And I found that commercial real estate was a good fit for all of that. So the quick analogy is example is I was doing rocket pitches in business school for health tech startups, but I don't write code. I'm not a tech guy. I'm not independently wealthy, so I'm not a capital guy. I wasn't going to be able to add any real value. I figured coming back into real estate, in particular, maybe real estate development would be a good avenue for me.
Sure.
And I think honestly, that's at least half the battle is just aligning your skill sets with the right company in the right industry.
Yep. Where can you create the most leverage on your skill set, and how do you put yourself in a position with upside?
Yeah, exactly. So me trying to convince myself that I'm a code writer is asinine. Like,
It's good
um,
awareness. You
yeah.
mentioned you knew you wanted to be an owner. Where did that come from? When did you realize you wanted to operate your own business?
When did I want to operate a business?
When did you realize that that was something you wanted to do? Is that something just
Oh,
from
I would say like undergrad. This
undergrad?
is like a deep rooted, either deep rooted issue, probably.
Where did that influence come from? Anyone in particular?
I don't know. I honestly I don't. I think there's probably some pride with having operating a business. I think
Sure.
there's some enjoyment working with people. So you kind of touched on this a little earlier, like um, building cultures, people, businesses, or something that I was gravitating to. And frankly, I don't know that it had to be construction. It could have been something else. If that at that time in my life, I was pitching IV clinics. I was working with a guy doing car services at parking lots of commercial landlords. Like,
Love
and I
that.
was trying a bunch of things. The burning desire was to create something, build
You're
something.
natural entrepreneur.
It's in construction.
It's funny that you say that. I feel the same way. I don't know. I knew I wanted to be a business owner. I had influence from my father, who runs a steel fabricating company, and other people in my life that I saw successful. They were also small business owners. So in my mind, that was the only way I was going to achieve the life and the success that I saw possible. I didn't know anyone in corporate America like growing up.
Yeah. So Renz, what I had mentioned earlier. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
The kind of like somewhat cheesy situation where I literally was making the list. Those were things that came up, like schedule flexibility, hopefully some financial freedom, all these other non-professional experiences I wanted came back to owning my own company. Hopefully, that's the goal. So the corporate ladder is always available, and certainly lots of people succeed at that. My thought at the time, and it still exists today, is that I will keep knocking on this door and trying it. And if that fails, I will go back to the corporate ladder. It was really scary to me that the corporate ladder, you can get knocked off at any point. One bad manager can
Uh-huh.
derail your whole career. There's too many politics in it. So I, oddly enough, found it less risky and more worth my effort to go off and try and create something from scratch.
I see things very similarly. And it's like the cost of inaction became too great. I saw the risk elsewhere, and that's like what pushed me to take that action.
Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned it didn't necessarily have to be construction. What you found is that your passion's really in teams and creating something. And I align with that in a lot of ways. Like I love the engineering world and the built environment. I'm more passionate about building a team, a business, creating value, seizing opportunity, finding opportunity, right? Like those are the things I'm truly passionate about. It's a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here on design development, right? They're the journeys to finding and seizing that opportunity. MBA program. Any major takeaways? I talk a lot about the rub between to go MBA or to not. And I don't think there's any silver bullet answer. There's a different answer for every person. And I know you think about things through several different lenses. So if you reflect on your MBA program, did you enjoy that time, or any takeaways from that program that like impact who you are today?
Yep, I have a handful of thoughts to unpack here. I did enjoy the time, and I think there's a bunch of pride associated with it. Um, I don't know that it has to be an MBA. I mean, I think any advanced degree, we work right here with some people that have engineering degrees, so those are arguably more applicable. What I found in the MBA program for me was that it was, and how I judge, frankly, a lot of other people we work with, is a good proxy for future work ethic, success. Um, it's a little bit of an odd way to spin it, but very little of the coursework in that program I apply today. But I think there's something to be said about those that took that initiative. They made that investment, whether it be their time or money, and they went through that. And it seems like it does often translate pretty well to success in the workplace. That said, there's countless examples of people that did not go that route that are equally driven, equally committed. I can only really speak for myself, but I don't regret going. And it does stand out to me when people have advanced degrees coming to hiring.
I look for the commitment to lifelong learning.
Yes.
I look for people that are naturally curious and trying to improve themselves. So getting an MBA, any type of higher education, is certainly driving that message home that they're willing to invest in themselves at learning and put themselves in a new position. And I think, like you said, I don't necessarily go back through my coursework in engineering and apply what I got in this course on a day-to-day. Some of it's very influential, but it was really a foundation to learn from. It was a foundation that I can then apply in theory. It taught me how to learn, how to solve problems.
Yeah.
I see their path in MBA program.
We don't always come right out and say this in the hiring process, but I think the two things that I would put really high on the list is, if you can assess someone's character and cultural fit. And then the other one is kind of intellectual curiosity. I'm not sure if that's the most appropriate term for it.
I like the term. I like it.
And that can come, people that are pivoting in their careers, could come in the form of going to school. But those that are genuinely curious to keep learning are the people we want in our organization.
It's a great attribute to look for.
Yeah.
Launching Surus Development and Construction. You kind of gave us a little insight there into the opportunity that you saw. You saw that project management and construction was one of your differentiators, and you were looking for a market and opportunity to create leverage on that skill set. Can you walk us through the story of launching Surus? What was the opportunity you were seizing?
So certainly it starts with joining Jumbo. That was the first move. Surus didn't exist, wasn't on the radar. At that moment in my life, I was interviewing locally at some much larger firms that I would consider, more or less gold standard.
So you were interviewing at other large development firms?
Yeah.
Jumbo Capital.
Yep, exactly. So I had not landed a job. I felt like I was on the goal line of one in particular. And I remember going to my wife and saying, that was the gold standard. It was right in Boston. It was going to be the place you could just spend the rest of your career. And then at that time, I'd been reaching out to Jumbo Capital for business development from my current employer then. And they asked if I was interested in coming in. And for some context, coming in was to do some construction management. Now, at the time, they didn't have a contractor, so you're really just overseeing their projects. But their projects were largely small interior fit-outs in the office portfolio. So I certainly wasn't really interested in going to Jumbo for that role alone. In the interview process, it appeared that they were starting to dabble in development. They had a residential development and they had some self-storage that they were now committing to outside of the office portfolio, which was primarily just acquisitions, management, dispositions. And that raised, that was eye-opening because now all of a sudden it seemed like there might be an opportunity to create a construction/development company within a much more capitalized, stable environment. So it's considered like a really good incubator for a startup. Literally, the barrier to entry was I had a construction supervisor license. So I figured at the time I could get in and I could pull building permits and we could start slow. We could dabble at creating this group. And that's what we did. It took about a year. I'm lucky that I have a very supportive managing partner. I think they saw some interest in that. And we started pretty small. We did a couple of really small interior fit outs, and then we started focusing on development. And it wasn't building the vertical asset. It was site enabling, which if you care to go down that path, there's a whole value proposition with that. But it really is the story of like kind of crawling through it, like a little bit of fit out, beta test that, great, it works. Let's do some site enabling, that helped development. And then that somewhat naturally led into just doing the whole full execution, the ground up projects.
This really connects back to our conversation about alignment and enjoying the people you work with and kind of trusting the people around you. And then you connected that to your skill set and creating leverage with that by bringing it to a company who had a need. There was a void there that you could help fill. And to find that alignment is an amazing way to launch a company and de-risk launching a company, right? It's really at no risk to the partnership. They got to do the work anyway. and you
No,
start
it
small
was,
and build up.
yeah. So going back to grad school, that was a theme that came up often, is that you don't have to go and start a company day one, brand new. There's corporate entrepreneurship. You can start a division, you can grow it out. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of that in Boston, at least I hadn't seen. So this was a pretty, unfortunately, I can't say there's a lot of these opportunities. Like this seemed like a pretty rare one. And if it didn't work for Jumbo and the partners at the time, it was no loss to them. And if it didn't work for me personally, I would be back to square one interviewing for larger firms. So it seemed like it was mutually a low risk proposition. And because we didn't jump in so fast, we didn't go from day one building a $30 million condo development. We had eased into it over a number of years. It seemed like it was regulated and spot checked.
That's the way to look at it. You can see people hesitant to say, take that leap of faith to bet on themselves. But when you really go through, like, what is the true risk of failure? Like, how is this going to influence my life? And when you can go through it and you're saying, like, I'm really not going to be any worse. I'm not going to be in a bad position anyway. So, like, how do we create opportunity but minimize our risk? Go for it.
Yeah, and so I can, probably share a real story without using exact names, but that firm in Boston, you kind of get to the final round of interviews and you start meeting with the heads of all the departments in this firm. Each person I met with had been there 18, 20, 29 years. It was amazing how long people had been there. And I finally got to the top guy, and he said, this place is like GE, like it is a fantastic place to work. You can retire here. That's why people are here for decades. But if you have an entrepreneurial itch, go scratch it elsewhere. And you'll be back here in a few years if it doesn't work. So, which is a little interesting to think of at this point, that I was so married to that opportunity. I went through all of those rounds of interviews to get to the final step and have the guy talk me out of the job, which I think speaks pretty well to that firm and that individual.
It says a lot about them. I think that was a tremendous gift.
Yeah. So I've been blessed with, unfortunately for anyone listening that's hoping to get something out of this, some of it's just running into good people and getting good advice and a little bit of luck. So I had a great culture at Barry. I had some really good experiences, a couple bad experiences and bad bosses that I learned more from them than the good experiences. And then I had some good advice that pivoted me to where I am now.
There's luck there, but I would call there's different types of luck, and what you did there, that's situational luck. You put yourself in a position to be lucky, so to speak.
Fair
right?
enough.
So if you're not doing anything, you're just sitting around like hoping to get lucky. To come that opportunity. You invested in your education, you invested in networking, you had a list of 45 companies, you went through 18 interviews at one company to get this one piece of advice that can like really change how you look at things for a lifetime. So it's pretty, I think that's a really great takeaway. Like, again, for that business leader to have somebody through 18 interviews, like they had a big investment in just getting to know you. And for him to say, if you have an entrepreneurial itch, don't come here. You're not going to scratch there. Go scratch that elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's the importance of alignment, because he knew if you were an entrepreneur and you were there, you weren't going to be happy. And it wasn't going to be, you weren't going to be a 2-decade team player. Quick break from today's episode. We want to get this to as many people as possible. Our goal is to help everyone in the community. So it's going to come to people like you sharing this with a friend. Do that. Let's get back to the show. Surus Construction. So we get off the ground. You have some early wins. We have this existing portfolio of assets under management at Jumbo that we have to service. But we're also building a construction company bigger than just managing those assets. Could you talk about building a team, building a business, the type of market you're working in? What's sort of something to that?
Well, so the building the team happened somewhat organically. We were, again, situational luck, if you will. We were in the position of hiring general contractors, so we had pretty good access to staff and talent. And when we first sought out to expand our team, those job postings were well received by some of our existing contractors. So it worked rather well and rather quickly. We were able to absorb some talent, particularly on the field staff. And once we had that going, that really, there were certain hires right in the early days that enabled us to build. So I think on the office side, we always had some people that had the project management background, and we can almost flip-flop between project managers and development managers. what we were lacking at the time was field staff, true builders. And I'll get into that later, but the people that really, in our opinion, and the way we're set up, that are really responsible for building are the field staff.
You think that's the linchpin to project delivery? They're the people making sure the building goes together, right?
Yeah, this is a complete bias on my end, and I'm sure others will have competing philosophies, but the field staff is the area that I have not ever been able to take any risk with. So we really want people with deep expertise because they ultimately have the most risk to mitigate or the most risk to pile onto our project. Whereas the office staff for us, and I think this could be said at a lot of places, we can use a variety of backgrounds to do that. It's a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of it comes down to how well the rapport is they create with the design team, the client, how well they communicate. You don't necessarily need deep construction expertise for those skill sets. Again, just my opinion. And then on the office team, I can further expand and try and find backgrounds that are not always pure construction. So we went through a phase where we were hiring people that we thought were going to benefit the development process the most, help add the most value to our parent company. So we hired someone with a civil engineering background, environmental permitting, because if we're going to be used and engaged to de-risk projects and be a real partner up front, we want these diverse backgrounds. So a little bit contrasting in the field, we're hiring and looking for pure construction people. On the office side, we're actually looking for a great deal more diversity. There's also, the truth is there's some money involved. On the office side, there are people in the market that compensation really does grow quite a bit. And if they're not truly building it for us, and they're not adding value in other areas such as due diligence, site selection, supporting the development effort, it's a little hard to justify those costs, at least at our scale, which is a mid-market, more boutique size.
Yeah. There's other tangible value that they're bringing to the team outside of just their project management day to day because they have that diverse background.
Well, they also relate better to the clients we predominantly work with are, the way I view our clients, right? They're the lenders, the banks, they're the equity partners, they're the jumbo owners, reps, and staff. And then when we go third party, there's a lot of those backgrounds. I'm trying to do some alignment too with my team that aligns.
I imagine that's a good sell to third party owners because they know you think like an owner. You also have the development team, right?
Yeah. So we're creating teams that think like an owner, we hope, speak like an owner, have relatable backgrounds, both professionally and educationally, and create an experience and a level of comfort.
What types of projects is your team working on today?
Today, currently we're on the interior side, we're building a medical office for a client down in the South Shore. On the ground up development side, we're building a GMP facility in Canton, Mass, a big core and shell. And we have 3 self-storage ground ups that are under design right now. Hopefully we'll be kicking off soon. And we just spun out of a large 79 unit condo development in the Boston area.
Yeah, so you really have a diversified capacity, or you can work in a number of market sectors there with your team.
I think so. I think if we're thinking about the business cycles, we had our launch, which was the first few years. We're in what I would consider our growth mode, and somewhere real soon we're going to try and have to refine what asset classes we want, if we even want to, pigeonhole ourselves to that. That is an inflection point we're currently in. Is do we want to cast a wide net and just continue to grow and refine the business, or do we want to specialize in certain classes? I will say where the team seems to have the most enjoyment is, and we have the most success, probably correlated, is in the ground up industrial type classes. So warehouse, self-storage, GMP, core and shell facilities. So in a perfect world, we'd focus on those. And the team we've built is predominantly their background and talent lines up with ground up development.
Fantastic. You mentioned self-storage being, and this is a little sidetrack of a story, but I'm very interested in that market sector as a whole. I feel like self-storage has exploded in the last 5-10 years. And I know your team, both on the development and construction side, has been involved. What's driving the self-storage growth? Do you still love it as an asset class looking out another 10 years?
Well, I don't know 100% what's driving it, but it's often tied to the boom in residential. So there's a lot more residential being built. They're not large units. So if you align yourself in proximity to those demographics and that population, there's just a need, simply a demand that's created. I think the self-storage as an industry, and this part predates me, but I think the reputation was pretty negative. And in the early days, they were much lower rise buildings, so they're sprawl. So the ones that we're involved in and the ones I see most often going up now are much more sophisticated buildings. So they're 4, 5, 6 stories tall. I know, generally speaking, they're usually the feedback we get is they're frowned upon when we're permitting them, but they're pretty benign assets. So for cities and towns, they don't tax your police department, your school systems. They produce great tax revenue. The challenge will be probably going forward is it's just going to be there's a market saturation. So we set up thinking we were going to build about 10 of these, and we're pretty soon coming up on that, developing. The last 3 in the pipeline right now will get us close to 10. And so it's inevitably probably a bubble because there'll be, if I had to guess, there's a bubble coming on them because
there's a bubble at some point because of the supply demand. But it makes sense with like the increase in multifamily housing, people want to be around cities. Like you don't have space in those apartments. They're getting smaller and smaller, I think, by the year. So it makes sense. And to your point, we're not talking about, it's not always a suburban, sprawling, single-story self-storage facility. They're trying to be close to these urban centers so people have access to their stuff.
They are. The other thing that's contributing to the explosion of these being built is on the exit. There's a healthy market for buying them. So it started as the REITs, your extra space, your public storage. The last few that we've disposed of have gone to private equity firms trying to scoop up market share. So when you have a healthy market of buyers out there, that's going to drive construction.
It's really good insight. I like that. And I can see technology playing a role here. And if I think of it as somebody that would consider acquiring a self-storage facility, technology allows it to be more hands-off, which means you have less operational risk and predictable cash flow if you can map out that saturation, right?
Yeah, you can enter them these days without any human contact.
Which is why it's probably a preferred acquisition. Interesting. Could you share us a lesson learned? So going back to Surus, what year did this launch? Was it 2016, 2017?
Yeah, 2017, and I would say the first roughly 3 years were like those early stage site enabling efforts, and then the last 3 years were full ground up.
In site enabling, is that some of the value add stuff you were just alluding to with the team in the office, like those additional skills, the civil, the environmental? What's site enablement to you?
Yeah, so yes, that certainly contributes to wanting people with some of those backgrounds, because inevitably we end up with a lot of those situations. But the value prop between the two companies is, so here's my analogy. You buy land, you sit on it, you get it permitted, you're designing it, you're bidding it, but usually have a handful of months there while you're bidding it out, running the RFP process with the GC. If you're the landowner, the developer, that's cash you're burning every month. So the origin of our involvement was that was a prime opportunity to get in there and demo the building, remove ledge, soil remediation. Each site is different, but there's all this work that oftentimes is owner responsibility anyways. So we were taking that off the plate of the GC, but no one was fighting that because it was usually minor and creating a pad-ready site. So we were doing this concurrent to our RFP process and therefore shaving a few months off the schedule, which we are at the developer on the hook for paying and carrying the land, the insurance, the interest. So it was really nothing more than
Love that.
A lever or a tool by using our own team to improve the outcome of that development. And it worked well with most GCs we were hiring. It was a good fit. And then we just developed a little bit of expertise in the site enabling. And that's where a lot of the risk is. So we're de-risking it in the process. And then just somewhat organically, a little fast forward a few years, it got to the point of like, well, if we have the staff and talent and we can further control costs in the project, why not just go vertical and build the thing ourselves? And that's exactly what happened.
It's a great strategic approach to especially investing in your business and building capacity at Surus while focusing on this smaller portion of the greater development scheme, but a high value, high return. You're reducing schedule risk and like investment risk, right? Because you're exposing and getting rid of all of the site risk in a deal, which a lot of people will say like the risk is in the dirt, right? Good dirt's a great thing. And once you're out of the dirt, it gets pretty predictable from there.
Well, not to keep harping on the self-storage deals, but those are good examples where the land basis is, really pretty consistent in the deals we look at, and the construction cost, although they creep each year, is manageable and predictable. So when you're underwriting those deals and pitching into equity, those elements aren't so confusing. You can be pretty close at an early point. It's the site cost, and that's what skews it. And on deals that size, that are, let's say they're $20 million, couple million for the land, 12 million for the building, being off by 1 or 2 or 3 million on the site will tank that deal. So the sooner you can get an understanding the needs of the site, and more often than not, the best sites are the toughest to work with. There's just not a lot of easy sites anymore. So
there's no more
premium you have to pay at the very entry to the best sites.
Well said, Steve. Company and industry challenges. What do you see going on out there? Are you identifying potential opportunities, solutions to those challenges? What do you see out there?
Talk like macro industry issues.
Wherever your heart takes you.
All right. So staffing is always fresh in my mind, and
it should be for all business owners, right?
Yeah. And I think I can sympathize with some people, because I know when I was younger, as we've talked about, I wasn't even planning on being in this industry. And I think if I'm being candid, a hang up I had in my early years was feeling like construction and this, the whole industry wasn't that sexy or financially rewarding. I was, frankly jealous and chasing other opportunities that friends were doing. It just didn't feel like a long-term good solution. But so I don't know if the interest is there, unfortunately. And then on the big concern is on the field side. I don't think there's that many good builders left. So we have a handful of site supers that I think are great. They're older. So I'm a little nervous when there's going to be some turnover, both in the subcontractor pool and the guys and the men and women that are actually on the sites building, because it seems to be a drop-off of experienced builders out there. And while people in my age demographic and younger arguably are better at communication and technology, it doesn't seem like there's enough of that to fix a problem if no one knows how to build things.
That's for sure.
It seems like people grew up, the ones I'm thinking of, with much better training and experience building. And when those individuals leave our marketplace, it's concerning. So the best I can do on our end is to try and recruit and retain some of those people, frankly, from usually larger firms, offer them a landing spot where they feel appreciated and it's comfortable for them. And then my sincere hope is that they're going to be the group that trains everyone below them for us.
Well said.
I don't know where else in the market to get it. I feel like we have to bring that training in-house. And
this comment came up, or this quote came up in another episode of Design Development with Enzo Scalora, but it's be the change you want to see. So it's like, if we see an industry-wide problem, it's absolutely all of our individual business problems. So what are we doing collectively to change that narrative? Because society as a whole, I think, is probably driven that. It's like, go to college, get the post-grad degree, and get an office job. And going to trade school isn't a good thing. So here we are years later, and that becomes the pinch. And for the people that are drawn to that world, I think the message is there is absolutely a lucrative career and a fulfilling career in that role. And as as that scarcity of that person becomes less and less available, like that scarcity goes up, like those opportunities are just going to be more lucrative because supply demand. So
yeah, if I was starting all over again, I would potentially consider creating a subcontractor business. I'm routinely envious of those that wrap up their days a little earlier and have a more refined focus, and it seems quite lucrative, and they're more than in demand. So
well said. And
there's maybe the trades aren't considered the most entrepreneurial venture, but they really could be, like literally any day now.
They could be. I agree. And technology and innovation in that space is going to change it over the next 10 years. And to bring this conversation full circle, you mentioned culture. In an industry where there is a shrinking supply of technical expertise on the building site, culture becomes increasingly more important. That becomes your differentiator. That's how you attract people instead of them going to your competitors. So we need to be out there as businesses communicating to our prospective employees why they should want to work here versus any other construction company, communicating what opportunity are they seeing because they join you.
I should probably preface that when I say make these comments, I'm doing it through my perspective, which is again a mixed bag of open shop and union, but our projects are generally considered mid-market to small. So I wouldn't want anyone to misconstrue my comments, because maybe at the bigger levels, there's some really large trades, there's some really large GCs that probably have the training that I wished we had. So I think it's probably a macro industry problem, but I think it's particularly sensitive at the scale I'm operating at.
Sure. And like you said, you had experience in the larger corporations that give you the vision on where you want to lead that company. You can't have all the things of a $1 billion organization the day you start, right? The resources and the drives, that business has different needs, but having the awareness to where things are going is a really important step.
And there's equally an opportunity for contractors and developers at our scale, because there's an entire market out there that's above the mom and pop kind of scale, where you need robust protocols, safety, planning, technology, but they're not projects and budgets, frankly, that will support the really large companies. So I'm being pretty broad here, but like in that $10 to $50 million project size, that is an awesome area to focus on. So you're really applying big company talent, big company processes, big company technology at that smaller size or smaller project to differentiate. And my hope is that there's a number of us playing in that sandbox, and there's a number of subcontractors that are going to refine their own companies to operate there, because I think there's really a good amount of opportunity in that space.
You're a visionary thinker, Steve. I can appreciate the strategy and the things that you're working on. As we wrap up today's conversation, I'd like to share two things. One is your top book or podcast that you'd recommend to our listeners.
I think there's one, Design Development, I would suggest.
It's a huge podcast. Definitely check it out.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'll take it away. And best piece of advice for emerging leaders. We've had a lot of bits and pieces to share today. I think to close things out, it'd be a nice thing to leave it with.
I don't have any scripted line for this, but I would, to the degree that you balance a fine line, fail as often as possible early on. That seems to be the greatest lessons come from failures more than success, in my opinion. You just try not to fail so much that you're not afforded more opportunities.
Fail, but don't fail too bad. Don't be afraid of failure. Great piece of advice. Steve, I appreciate your friendship, your partnership in this business. I appreciate you and the teams at Jumbo and Surus a lot. And thanks again for joining us on Design Development.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Renz.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Design Development. Real quick before you leave, our goal is to help as many people as possible. We're a growing community, and you're a big part of it. So just click that send button. Send this episode to a friend to let them get those same insights that you got today. We appreciate you. See you next time.